When you are designing something, wouldn't it be nice to also have the ability to walk through the space in more than just your mind's eye? I'm Todd Wyant, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast. You're invited to join my mission to embrace and share the innovations transforming the AEC, MEP, and manufacturing industries. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Mark Petrucci, Director of CTG Services at Applied Software. All right, welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you.
Excited to have you on the podcast here.
My first one in a long time, so glad to be part of it.
Yeah, I was telling you beforehand that I think that you were one of our first guests 3 years ago when this show looked drastically different, but
It's so long ago that I forgot all about it, so glad to be part of it again.
that's right. It's a little bit different format now, but excited to have you. Can you start by giving just kind of a brief overview of your background?
Sure. Well, come from upstate New York, went to school as a civil engineer, graduated, worked 5 years in upstate New York, moved to Atlanta in '95, got a job with an architectural firm, was hired to be their CAD manager. AutoCAD was just getting popular in the early '90s, and so I became a CAD manager, and then that developed into an IT manager. I was there for 13 years.
Okay.
Then when we grew to about 120 people, I decided to move on to a much bigger firm. I've always been a customer of Applied Software.
Nice.
In 2007, I reached out to Applied, looking to help companies transition over from CAD to BIM.
Okay.
And that fit me really well because my background in CAD and BIM, it was a good transition. And then in 2014, when Autodesk started to focus on construction, they asked if I wanted to lead the services team. And so since 2014, I now lead the construction technology group at Applied Software, and we manage all the services around BIM 360, Bluebeam, PlanGrid, and VR, something that came up a few years ago that I thought would be a great tool, not only for design, but also construction.
Nice. So can you explain the difference between AR and VR?
Yeah, well, there's AR, there's VR, there's MR, there's a lot of combinations, but first, when we talk about BIM and the BIM files, we're talking about a virtual world. So what VR stands for is virtual reality. And with VR, you are completely immersed into a virtual world.
Okay.
So you'll put on a pair of goggles and you won't see anything around you. And so by being completely immersed in it, you kind of experience some of the feelings as though you're in a real building. AR is when we place the virtual world and overlay it on top of the real world. So a common example is Pokemon Go. And see people walking around with their phones and they're chasing these digital or virtual characters that are floating around somewhere in space, and they're looking for those characters. I've never done it, so I can't tell you exactly how it works. But AR is a combination of virtual and blending it with the real. VR is when you're completely inside a virtual model. Interesting.
So how would an AEC firm leverage both AR and VR?
Yeah, the VR would be great. Actually, AR and VR would be great both for design as well as construction.
Okay.
For new buildings, a lot of time people outside of the construction industry or design industry, they don't get a sense for the size or the space. And so by using VR, we can actually put them in the building before it's ever constructed, before we ever break ground. It's critical that the owner experiences what it's like, because too many changes happen during construction, and that's the worst time to make changes. So by placing owners and even contractors and designers in the model before construction gives us a chance to experience it and make changes on the fly.
Interesting. So I think you were touching on it there, but what are some of the kind of practical advantages of VR for a construction firm?
Yeah, so for VR, a lot of it has to do with what we call 4D BIM, which deals with the 3D model and scheduling. What a lot of people don't understand is just how much time is spent planning the project. During the construction phase, you have to plan, what gets built when, who's going to do it. So there's a lot of time spent. Project schedule is critical. If you miss the schedule, that can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so with VR and construction, contractors are able to see the project constructed virtually before we ever get to the job site. Now, not to say that happens on all projects, because some projects, the superintendent, the project managers, they've done similar projects. So they don't always need VR. And so I do want to emphasize VR is a great tool, but there's a time and a place for it. And that's where we try and help customers understand when is a good time for VR, when is a good time for AR, because there are some differences.
So what are some potential challenges and pitfalls that people should be kind of on the lookout and aware for when working in VR?
Yeah, well, VR and AR both, we see it a lot. You'll see online videos and people don't realize just how much time has to be involved to just kind of plan it out.
Yeah.
It's not plug and play. You need specific hardware, you need specific software, and they have to be able to talk nice with each other. If you try and take the cheap way out, then you're going to be sacrificing some things that you may not necessarily want to sacrifice. There are a lot of VR systems out there, and they all do some things the same, and then other things that are unique to each one. So it's important that you also get the right system for yourself. A lot of people also look at the price of the equipment. The equipment that we have here in our office, we bought some equipment a few years ago. I think we ended up spending about $400 on the goggles. Then we spent another, I want to say $1,800 on a computer to run it. So we had to get the right hardware. And people tend to look at that cost and they back away from it. But what they really don't realize is the benefits that if you use VR, you'll save money later on during design and during construction.
So have that long-term view in mind.
Yeah, it's a business decision, and it's important that they understand that there's going to be a cost up front, but there's a value, there's a return on investment to invest in VR.
Interesting. Is the software, is it really up to snuff in a practical sense, or is it just kind of a cool toy, fun to have?
Yeah, it's cool. A lot of games out there, you can do it, but I relate it to like your phone. Your phone, you can download apps and you got some cool games on there, but then there's so much more you can do with your phone. And so same thing with VR. As long as you apply it the right way, you can receive tremendous benefits from it. And again, just like on a phone, there are different apps that do some of the similar things. Same thing in the VR world. There are different VR programs. Each one has their own unique features. And it's important that customers kind of see each program so they kind of understand what's similar and what's different.
Interesting. So what stage of the design process is it more relevant to use AR and VR?
Yeah, well, obviously for either of those, you need a model. So the sooner you can get it involved, the better. You need a 3D model. So designers have to generate 3D models. A lot of times the architect will be ahead of the engineers. And so if we can get the architects using VR and showing their owners, their customers a VR model, the first thing that they'll do is they'll get a sense of just the size of the space. Okay. It's so common that people who are not designers just underestimate how big a room might be or how small it might be. It's all based on feel. We can design buildings all day long, but it needs to feel a certain way. And VR kind of brings that. It brings that feeling of, hey, this space is big or it's too small. Let's make some adjustments on the fly. Because it's a lot easier during design than it is during construction. Yeah,
I imagine that really helps being able to visualize it in a whole different way than just seeing it on a computer screen too.
Yeah, and I tell people, and I often use the term, you have to experience VR because we can generate 3D renderings, we can create 3D models on the screen and you can look at it. But I kind of relate it to if you're going to go to the Grand Canyon. You can look at pictures of the Grand Canyon all day long, and then you show up and you're like, wow, okay, this is bigger than I thought. Okay?
Right.
We know it's one of the wonders of the world, but until you get there and you experience it, you really don't understand on the value of it. So that's where VR comes in. It really helps people understand the project before we ever get started with construction.
Yeah, very cool. I bet the owners would really like this and help push it.
They do, and some owners do and some don't. What really benefits the owners, again, is that they can see the project, they could experience it. One of the other benefits that we don't really get into too much with VR up front, and we try and avoid it, actually deals with materials and colors. Trying to simulate colors and patterns and fabrics in a model. We don't do that up front. We do that usually later on.
Okay.
But the owners will sometimes say, well, can I see what it looks like with this color carpet and this color wall? And while that could be done, there's a time and a place when we want to discuss that. And so we try and introduce it to the owners at a particular time and what they need to see. And then when we're ready to talk about maybe finishes, then show them some options.
Gotcha. Going back to the model, you said you have to start with a 3D model. Does having VR and knowing that you're going to be in that virtual reality space, does it change the way you have to go about building the model?
It does. I'll give you a good example. Project Amelia is a house that we're working with the owners in Florida, Amelia Island.
Okay.
Normally when we're designing a home, we don't model all the trim work. We may show the trim work in a section view. We'll show the trim work in an elevation view, but we typically don't place 3D trim all through the entire building.
Yeah.
Or the home. As we were walking through the home early on, we noticed, okay, there's trim on this wall, but not this wall. And while that wouldn't have affected the overall project, that is something that would jump out to the owner and say, well, why is there no trim over here? Right. So we have to make sure that we add a lot more detail to the model so that the owner's not drawn to that. They're drawn to just the overall size of the project.
Yeah, you don't want that one little detail them kind of zeroing in on.
Exactly.
The point of it is to have that experience.
Exactly.
Interesting. So how does AR and VR or MR, how does that help with collaboration?
It's interesting. I was at Autodesk University this past November, and I saw some VR programs out there that allows multiple people from different parts of the country, even the world, to be in the same VR model.
Oh, wow.
And so by having multiple people inside the same VR model, you're now collaborating and you're reviewing the model together. A lot of times we're just sharing drawings or 3D views back and forth, but actually collaborating live within a model benefits the entire team. So the collaboration aspect of VR has really kind of set it apart, that there's nothing like it. Conference call does not replace it. Looking at 3D models on the screen doesn't compare. Actually holding collaboration meetings inside a VR model with multiple people at the same time in the same model is a tremendous benefit.
Do you see a movement towards doing that?
I do. In fact, we have a local architect here that was looking to do that. So they weren't sure with which program to go with. So we worked with them. We first reviewed what they wanted, their needs. Then I contacted 4 different VR companies. I interviewed each one, told them what our needs were, and then we set up a demo with each one. And the architect and the vendor were able to work together, collaborate, be in the same VR model, and experience what it was like to be able to collaborate. One of them in particular, which I found fascinating, and when I saw it at AU, I put on the headset and immediately I heard a woman's voice behind me, and she said, "Hi Mark, I'm right behind you." And they turned around, there's just a silhouette of a person standing there. And she introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm going to show you around."
Oh, wow.
And I said, "Are you real?" And she says, "Yes, I'm in Portland."
Oh, wow.
And I said, "All right." And so it was a little weird at first talking with her, but I could see her head move. I could see her hands move. But as we started to continue to talk and she was showing me around the VR model, I completely forgot about her being this virtual person and more of a real person that I'm speaking with.
Interesting. That's super. It's like the future is here now. You always, growing up, you had all the future predictions of this virtual reality space, and that you could do stuff like that. And it's here now.
We don't have flying cars yet, but
the Jetsons aren't fully here yet.
Not yet, but the ability to have these meetings with multiple people in a virtual world is really, I found it fascinating. And we showed it to our customer, and the customer decided to go with another route because there were some features that they wanted, but they were still very much impressed with the ability to collaborate inside a 3D model. Yeah,
very cool. So one of the kind of ever escalating problems in the industry is with rising labor cost and having to do a bunch of rework. Is there a play here for AR and VR to help reduce some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned earlier about changes. When we make changes during design, they're fairly quick. We go into the model, we make those changes. When the changes start to happen in construction, it has a lot of negative impact. Number one, you have to pull a crew that could be moving forward with their work. They now have to pull back and go back and fix something or change something. Which means now that maybe the contractor has to hire more people to stay on schedule, which means now they have to spend more money to be able to stay on schedule. So, they're pretty good with any sort of rework. The quality, sometimes people comment about the quality may be not as well. It may be affected, but normally contractors are pretty good with the quality. It's the impact on the schedule and the labor cost that is typically affected.
Interesting. So you touched on some, but what are some examples of clients that have switched over to using AR and VR? So
we had one client, an architectural firm, a local firm here. They were working on a project in New York. It was a pretty interesting project. They wanted to see what customers would experience walking into the store and what they would experience going through the checkout line and coming out of the store. What was so interesting about this particular project was it was an old building and it had all these vaulted, curved ceilings and columns. The work was just amazing. The masons who created this, I don't know how many years ago, but they had that all modeled. And so they had all the aisles put in there. So we really got to experience what it was like to be a customer as we walked into the store and walked around. They had a loft area, which we were able to walk up into the loft area.
Nice.
And then look out at the entire store, which was just an amazing experience because I had never seen the site, but I felt like I was there.
Yeah.
And for the architect, they found the benefit of experiencing what it would be like once the project was completed and being able to communicate that to the owner.
Interesting. Very cool. Is this something with AR and VR that you can kind of just dabble in, or do you have to jump all in at once?
Yeah, I think if you're going to go buy your game system that has VR, that might be something you jump into. What I would recommend, like I said earlier, there's a lot of different programs out there, and they all have some unique features to them. You have to make an investment in the hardware. I think the investment in the hardware is going to be the same with whatever system you go with, but I think you need to look at the software that's available. What we like to do here at Applied Software, we want to first find out what the customer may need or what their expectations are. And then we like to offer some recommendations and then work with the customer to make the best solutions. We don't implement VR, but we like to manage the process of finding it and then helping control that project so that it's implemented the best way possible. But we are independent of which hardware and which software customers want to go with. We want to make sure we provide them the best solution.
Interesting. So you were touching on this, but if you could unpack it a bit more, how do people, what's kind of that first step of going into VR, and then how do you start to analyze those different softwares?
Yeah, I think the first step is just to get them introduced to it and experience it. So like here at our office, we've got some sensors that are set up. We have our VR system. We've got our computer set up. If we have the customer come out here and can put on the VR goggles, they immediately realize when I say you need to experience it.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not just a 3D model. So they first have to understand that feeling that you get when you're in your model, because that's critical. If they can't come here, I've got a suitcase that can pack up all my gear real nice and travel across the country and demo it as well. Again, I demo the hardware, but it's not the hardware that's important. It's the experience of what VR is. So I think they need to experience it, again, in a business environment, not a game system. You can fight zombies all you want. It's not the same. So I think it's important that they first experience it, then to sit down with us and review what their expectations are. They may not realize what they can get from it, what the benefits are. So we like to communicate some of the benefits of VR as well. And then hopefully they learn more and understand what the potential could be for their company.
Yeah. Do you see that light bulb going off pretty quick when they
Oh yeah,
start experiencing it?
It's amazing how quickly the light bulb goes off. And I remember our owner here, when I talked to him, when I first mentioned it to him, and he said, all right, let's get a set, let me see what's going on. And as soon as he put it on, he got it immediately.
Yeah.
So we started meeting with different architectural firms and showing it to them, and they immediately got it as well.
Yeah, very cool. So looking 5-10 years out, what do you see as some predictions for the industry using AR and VR?
Yeah, I think there's actually going to be more potential for AR than there is VR. VR is fairly controlled, where we're in an environment where we have our hardware and we have a room set up so that we can walk through the model. Mm-hmm. The renderings will get better, the realization will get better. But on the AR side, with AR, by superimposing the virtual onto the real world, mm-hmm. that's going to get easier to do. Right now, when I put on VR goggles, it could sense my room. And so let's say during construction, I need to place some walls in this particular area. I can put on the AR goggles and I can see where the walls have to go. Mm. And so I could walk over there and start laying out my walls. Mm-hmm. Now, it's a little shaky, so the AR is still kind of getting more precise, mm-hmm. but I see that's probably going to have more of an impact than VR will.
Interesting.
I'm actually excited to see where we can go with AR, because the whole idea of superimposing the virtual onto the real, mm-hmm. I think is going to be a tremendous benefit for everybody.
Yeah, sounds like it. So what are some future projects that you're working on?
So we're working with an architectural firm right now that they have a project in Denver that they're still on the fence. They haven't seen VR live yet, so I'm making plans to travel out there to show it to them. Mm-hmm. But they understand the benefits and they see other people doing it, and so they want that ability. With a homeowner or home builder in Florida, mm-hmm. A lot of homeowners, they are looking at homes online, yeah. and they're selecting homes and having them built, but they're still not quite experiencing what the final product would be like. Mm-hmm. So we're working with a home builder in Florida, trying to show them the benefits of using VR. We still need to make plans to visit their office and show it to them, but Project Amelia will be one of our projects that we present.
Nice. Can you unpack Project Amelia a bit more and just kind of explain what it is? I know you've been super instrumental in it.
Yeah, so Project Amelia, an interesting story related to VR with Project Amelia. It's a homeowner in Amelia Island, and they're building a brand new home in a beautiful subdivision. Mm-hmm. This homeowner, luckily for us, they were very interested in technology, very forward thinking. So they wanted to see what tools were available for them. VR was one of them. And that's where we learned, when we created the model, that we needed to add more detail for the homeowner. Something that happened though at the job site, I was there earlier this year, concrete was poured, and I was training some of the contractors how to lay out the walls using some other equipment to do that with, instead of just using an old tape measure. Chalk lines were laid out, and the homeowner showed up, and she looked at the chalk line and she said, boy, these rooms feel smaller than I thought. And that's when I had to kind of remind her that, the VR model, that's what it's going to feel like. Yeah. It feels different when you have chalk on the ground. It feels different when you put up just wood studs. It feels different when you put up drywall. It feels different when you paint it. Yeah. So the feeling changes over time, and we want to make sure that it feels right towards the end of the project, because if it doesn't feel right, they'll never be happy. Right. And so that's just an example that actually happened dealing with our customer and how VR affected their feelings for their own project.
Nice. And the cool thing with Project Amelia too is there's a video series kind of documenting different stages.
There is. I think we're up to 5 or 6 videos right now. So there's a contest online when Project Amelia will be done. Yeah. So people can take a look at the videos online. I'm in a few videos, and some other team members are in the videos. But it's a whole series. We're trying to show all the different technologies that are available and how they could benefit the project. So I encourage people to go out to our website and take a look at those videos.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes so people can click over there pretty easy. Well, so you brought a real model, I think the Project Amelia model. And so we're going to put on the VR. I'm going to get to experience it. Pretty excited about that. So anybody listening to the podcast, we'll put a link in the show notes there again, and they can watch the video experience of it. Thank you to those listening. If you're interested in learning more, visit our sponsor, Applied Software, at ASTI.com. You can also listen to this podcast anytime by simply going to Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, be sure to check out our website, bridgingthegappod.com. Until next time, I'm Todd Wyant, thanking you for joining us on the Bridging the Gap podcast. Keep innovating.